The British was the cry as the ship went down. Every man was steady at his post. Captain and crew, when they knew the worst, saving the women and children first. The British is the cry to everyone, and the fate has proved unkind. Oh, if you are willing, with a penny or a shilling, for those they left behind.
This is Beacon Park in Lichfield, and this is a statue to a great sea captain, Captain Edward John Smith, RD, RNR. He wasn't born in Lichfield. He didn't live in Lichfield. He was born in Hanley, Stoke-on-Trent. This statue was erected in 1914, and the original bronze plaque, which says, Commander Edward John Smith, RD, RNR, born January 27th, 1850, died April 15th, 1912, bequeathing to his countrymen the memory and example of a great heart, a brave life, and a heroic death. Be British. There's no mention on this original plaque of the ship which is most connected with Captain Smith, the greatest liner of its day, the biggest ship in the world, the ship that was to be his greatest and his final command. That ship was the Titanic.
When the mighty ship Titanic started from Southampton Bay, there were tears and fond goodbyes too, as she proudly steamed away. But soon a last disaster came and filled all hearts with woe. Although in sorrow now we weep, we yet are proud to know every man at his post as the big ship went down. To save precious lives there we find them. They died like heroes true. Now something we must do for the wives and little ones they left behind them.
This is Wells Street, Hanley, and this is number 51. It's changed a bit now, but on the 27th of January, 1850, it was the birthplace of Edward John Smith, later captain of the Titanic. Now, I think this is incredible, and I think it's incredible for two reasons. Firstly, because this is Wells Street, Hanley. It's not a Liverpool. It's not a Southampton. It's not a town with a famous seafaring or maritime tradition. It's a landlocked town. It's about as far away from the sea as you can possibly get. It's a town not of ships, but of clay and of coal. And I think it's incredible that a potter's son from Wells Street, Hanley, should get it into his head not just to go to sea, but to become captain of a transatlantic liner. The other remarkable thing about this is a little bit more subtle, but I think just as incredible. In those days, to be captain of a transatlantic liner was as much a social position as it was a navigational position. In other words, you got to be the captain of a ship such as the Titanic, not simply by being the best navigator or sea captain, but by having the social savoir-faire, the nous, if you like, to deal with the international, the transatlantic, rich and famous, the millionaire set who chose to sail not so much on a certain ship, but with a certain captain. There was something about Edward Smith that these people liked. He knew how to deal with them. He knew how to make polite and fascinating conversation on the captain's table. You'd think that someone who had that sort of savoir-faire would come from an aristocratic or at least a certainly very well-to-do background. But as you can see, this is an ordinary terraced house in an ordinary terraced street in Hanley, Stoke-on-Trent. Captain Smith must have been a truly remarkable person to make his way from an ordinary house like this to the bridge of the Titanic. In other words, the transatlantic rich set, the millionaires, chose to sail with Captain Smith. And that's not bad for a lad from Wells Street, Hanley.
Well, the importance of Captain Smith seems to be worldwide. I mean, everybody, the letters that I get from all over the world want to know about him. Have I got a photograph of him? Everybody I know from out of this country, and whenever they come to Stoke-on-Trent, they always want to go to Lichfield to see the statue, and they ask me why there is not a statue in Stoke. This telescope has always been on show in my house, and from when I was a little lad and asking about it, he said, "Oh, I'll show you one day." And when we came to Lichfield, that's when he showed me the statue. And ever since then, I've always gone to look at the statue. Whenever I go through Lichfield, if it's only 5 minutes, it's just off the main road, Beacon Park, I just go and have a quick look, and away I come. I should think I've looked at that statue thousands of times.
We're here at Etruria Methodist Church in Stoke-on-Trent, which used to be called Etruria Wesleyan Church and Schools, because here we have a photograph of Captain Smith. He was, for a long time, a member of this Sunday school. He came to Sunday school, and he was also a member and worshipper at this church. The photograph was given, in fact, by the members of the Old Boys' School, because in addition to being a church and schoolroom, this schoolroom, in fact, served as the day school for the surrounding area. It was the first day school in the area, and therefore John Smith, as a young boy, would come to this school and would be taught in these rooms. When he worshipped as an adult in the church, of course, it's a church which dated back to 1805, and since that day has been virtually unchanged. As you can see, the church itself is a typical Wesleyan church of the early 19th century, with the gallery going all round and the central pulpit. This has remained intact from its planning and building in 1805, and it would certainly be like this in almost exactness when Captain Smith did in fact worship in this church in the 90s and early years of the present century.
Captain Edward John Smith, born Wells Street, Hanley, January the 27th, 1850, son of Edward Smith Potter and Catherine Smith.
Educated at Etruria British School and became steam hammer operator at Etruria Forge.
At the age of 21, visited a friend at Liverpool and applied to join the Mercantile Marine.
Outstanding career. Captain first ship at age 24.
Became Commander and Commodore of the White Star Line.
Premier Atlantic Captain.
62 years of age, he was the very type of a British sea captain. Quiet, with shrewd, keen eyes beneath his shaggy brows. Strong in command, gentle in social converse. Modest as a simple seaman, brave as a lion, of unblemished honour.
Though I believe he's an awful stickler for discipline. He's popular with everybody.
As vessels increased in size and power, Captain Smith changed from one ship to another and bore the burden of increasing responsibility. He commanded 17 White Star liners in succession, and he was known and loved all over the world by men and women who travelled with him. His employers had absolute faith in his skill and judgment, and his caution and strength of character, and his unswerving fidelity to duty.
When anyone asks me how I can best describe my experience in nearly 40 years at sea, I merely say uneventful. Of course, there have been winter gales and storms and fog and the like, but in all my experience, I have never been in any accident of any sort worth speaking about. I have seen but one vessel in distress in all my years at sea, a brig, the crew of which was being taken off in a small boat in the charge of my third officer. I never saw a wreck and have never been wrecked, nor was I ever in any predicament that threatened to end in disaster of any sort. You see, I'm not very good material for a story.
Well, he seemed very large to me. I don't know whether he was, but he was very upright. And he had a beard. And, he looked different from all the other sailors in my eyes, which indeed he was. Yes, he was very nice. I met him, I should think, perhaps 3 or 4 times. I only remember that my father spoke to him several times, and a couple of times I was with my father, and he took us somewhere. I'm quite sure it wasn't the bridge, but it took us somewhere which was where passengers didn't normally go. But I, of course, wasn't a bit interested at 7 years of age. But he was very nice, I remember that, and he greatly admired a doll I had. He was very nice to me.
Well, the telescope, it's been in my family ever since I remember. My father used to tell me about it. It is inscribed Captain E.J. Smith, and on the end of it, it says the Olympic. It's as it was, I suppose. The leather, I put the leather on because the handpiece had worn away over the years. It was in my father's collection. His father gave it to him, and it was the personal property of Captain Edward John Smith, my great uncle. I've also got a cigar holder that another uncle of mine gave me when I started collecting the personal items together. I've also got a pair of epaulets. In the photographs that you see of Captain Smith on the bridge, those are similar type of epaulets, but no doubt he had several pairs. I mean, he would have a set of those on every tunic that he got. I've got pocket watches as well. Two pocket watches actually that belong to Captain Smith. And of all of them is sextant. This was in a coal house belonging to one of my uncles. He knew it was in the coal house but didn't know where. Of course, I've had all the box cleaned up, and as it was being cleaned, the initials came up on the box, EJS, Edward John Smith. Now the sextant is complete. There's nothing missing from it apart that it's slightly damaged. Now the date inside is 1909. Now the bit that's damaged, it looks as if it's been dropped. There's a piece of string attached to it. Now I've always left that string on. I don't know whether Captain Smith himself actually tied that knot on there or what ships this is sailed on. But as I say, it is complete in every way.
Well, my father was a builder, a master builder, and in England in 1911 business wasn't very good, and he had built a lot of houses which he couldn't let. Now that must sound very odd today, but it was so in those days. And when a friend of his who'd gone to Canada sometime early on came home to see him, he said, "You know, why are you putting up with this recession here? Why don't you join me in Canada? Together we could make a real do of things." And within the space of one evening, my father decided to cut all his losses and go to Canada to join his friend. Well, in those days, one went to New York by fast acting liners, one of which went every day of the week, I understand, and then on to Canada by train, because at that time of the year, when the St. Lawrence is frozen, one would have to go to St. John's or Halifax, which were small ports, and then a very tiresome journey across Canada from there. So we were going to New York. And my father made this decision this evening. I knew nothing about it, of course, I was in bed. But my mother was absolutely horror-stricken. Well, to really make the point there, I must tell you that my mother was quite a remarkable woman. She had married when she was quite young, and she was 18, and she married a very bad marriage, and her parents weren't at all pleased with her. But they were right, and she was wrong. And by the time she was 31, she had had 9 children, 9 babies, and they had all died. She had known what it was to be desperately unhappy and poor. And her children died and left her absolutely bereft, and with all this trouble behind her, which I'm quite sure made for the wonderful character she had. She had no illusions about things. Her feet were firmly on the ground. And so she met my father, married him, and they were divinely happy. He was so good to her. And I was born, which added to her joy. She had a lovely home. My father had a motor car, which in those days was rather remarkable. And everything was wonderful until this night. And the moment this arrangement had been made to go to Canada, my mother had this dreadful premonition. She'd never had one before, and she never had one after. But she said, "No, we can't do this. It's quite wrong. Something dreadful will happen." And I tell you, what the sort of woman she was. She's got both feet on the ground. For her to behave like that was absolutely unbelievable to everyone, but she just had that premonition. And my father said, oh, nonsense. And of course, time went by and the house was sold. And we were booked in the ship called the Philadelphia. And this coal strike came and she didn't sail. And we were then offered a berth in the Titanic, which absolutely delighted my father. I thought it was wonderful. The whole world was talking about that ship. I was 7. I'd read it was a big ship. It didn't really convey as much to it as it did to my parents, obviously. I mean, I'd never been in a ship at all before, so it didn't convey very much to me. But I do know everyone was talking about it. I remember the children at school saying, aren't you lucky? I can't really compare it with anything else. I'd never been in a ship before, but I've been in many ships since. I look back now and know it was very lovely. Very lovely. Boy, I was a cabin of 3. It was, I think really it was a 4-berth cabin and 1 berth hadn't been put up because there were 2, the side where my father and I were, my mother's was on that side. And she had an armchair and a wash basin and that sort of thing. It wasn't a first-class cabin, it was a second-class cabin. But I've been in first-class cabins since, it weren't nice.
On Wednesday, April the 10th, 1912, the White Star Liner Titanic started on her maiden voyage from Southampton to New York.
A crowd gathered on the pier to watch the great ship leave her moorings. And as she began to move in her immensity, cheers rolled out across the water in a great chorus of pride and triumph.
The band was playing a merry tune on deck, and passengers leaning over the rails waved farewell greetings to their friends and gave answering cheers.
On her way out from Southampton, the Titanic had a triumphant progress, towering tremendously above all the craft, which seemed so dwarf-like as the shadow of her great hull passed across them on the glittering waters.
Never was there a ship such as this. She was 1,000 feet long, so that as she swung round, she looked like a moving fortress. The strength of her shell was like that of a castle with massive walls of steel.
The heaviest sea could never wash aboard. We may laugh at dirty weather.
Right throughout the hull are steel girders, beams, and stanchions like the pillars of a cathedral to give her absolute rigidity in the heaviest sea. A system of watertight bulkhead doors has been designed with a massive construction which seems to defy the greatest danger.
Each door is held in the open position by a suitable friction clutch, which can be instantly released by means of a powerful electric magnet controlled from the captain's bridge, so that in the event of accident, the captain can, simply by moving an electric switch, instantly close the doors throughout, practically making the vessel unsinkable.
The Titanic could not sink.
The Titanic is unsinkable.
So in power, almost terrifying to the imagination, the Titanic was incomparable.
But in beauty and luxury also she had no rival. It seemed as if the builders of the Titanic had been riotous in their endeavour to make this greatest of ships the ultimate example of modern luxury, beyond which it would be impossible to go. On the 10 decks, you might forget the cares of life, the squalor and ugliness of life, even the duties of life. And in this sea palace of the Titanic Queen, spend the days of the voyage in continual pleasure and delight. These sound like words of exaggeration, but the Titanic was herself an exaggeration of ordinary things.
How many did you make then?
Now let's have a look. First class passengers 322, second class passengers 277, steerage passengers 709, and crew 898, making a grand total of 2,206.
And she isn't even half full.
Talk about a millionaire's special.
Have you seen us on board?
Colonel and Mrs. J.J. Astor.
Colonel Astor is one of the richest men in the world and served with distinction in the Spanish-American War.
Correct.
Mr. Benjamin Guggenheim.
The well-known American banker and multi-millionaire.
Mr. Archibald Buck.
Aide-de-camp to President Taft.
Mr. and Mrs. Isidore Strauss.
Who together rose from a small business in Philadelphia to make Macy's a national institution.
Ending in wealth, charity work, holidays, and a seat in Congress for Mr. Strauss.
Mr. W.T. Stead.
The famous journalist and reputedly William Randolph Hearst's chief advisor.
Mr. Thomas Andrews.
Managing director of Holland & Wolff.
Upon whose very vessel we now stand.
The Countess of Ruffin.
Off to America to meet her husband.
Sir Cosmo and Lady Duff Gordon.
Her ladyship widely known as Society Modiste Lucille.
Mr. J. Bruce Ismay.
Managing director of the White Star Line. There was all the drama of life within that floating city, all that interchange of social courtesies, all those beginnings of pleasant friendships, all those partnerships of love, which are to be found on a transatlantic liner. Some of these men were busy, no doubt, with the thoughts and schemes of ambition, planning out their future as
month they paced the decks, smoking quietly in the darkness and peace of night.
But she said to him, now, I don't want any more unhappiness about this, but my mind is made up, and I will not go to bed in this ship. I shall sleep in the daytime, and I shall sit up at night. And I so well remember what he said to her. He said, if you want to be so stupid, I can't stop you. She said, I know, but I'm going to do it. And she did. And she sat up Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, and on Saturday night, she heard an odd sound, and she awakened my father and made him go out on the deck. And he came back and told her that it was ice floes that she could hear grinding against the side of the ship, not to be so silly. And at breakfast the next morning, other people said they had gone up on deck. They had heard this sort of noise. And they agreed it was ice floes. And my mother then said, well, surely if there's ice in abundance in the sea, there could be icebergs. And this officer who was down table, he said, oh, nonsense, an iceberg is an enormous thing. We should see an iceberg. You've nothing to be afraid of. And that was on a Sunday morning. And for the first time, since we had gone on board the ship, she didn't get up from breakfast and go straight to bed, which was what she normally did, because it was Sunday and she thought she'd like to go to church, which she did. And then we had lunch together before she went to bed. And I remember that meal so well because that was the last meal that the three of us ever had together. Because in the evening, by dinner time, I was in bed, of course. And she just came and joined in whatever was happening during the evening, that sort of thing. And my father got very cross because he had every reason to dislike gambling. His father had been a compulsive gambler and had died utterly penniless from being quite a wealthy man. And so everybody was gambling on this Sunday night. They were making books, I think it's terms, and having sweet steaks as to what time she would get in so many minutes past her. So my father would have nothing to do with it. And so he went to bed quite early, for him anyway. And my mother sat down to sew and read. And she looked up at him, he was reading. He said he got a very interesting book. But quite quickly, he went to sleep. And she got up and took the book from him and settled down again.
Within the high steel walls of the Titanic, all that civilization means, all that human life means, was here gathered up. The rich men of the world, the heirs and heiresses of great fortunes, lay a few decks away from Irish emigrants and from the people of poverty. All sorts and conditions of men, the whole scale of human life, the whole gamut of human emotions, were enclosed in that palace ship. And though they knew it not, in a little while, wealth and poverty, youth and old age, would be made equal before the face of eternity.
April the 14th, 8:55 p.m. Captain Smith and Second Officer Charles Herbert Lightler are on the bridge. There is not much wind?
No, sir. It is a flat calm.
A flat calm.
In any case, there will be a certain amount of reflected light from the birds.
Oh, yes, there will be a certain amount of reflected light. If you are the slightest degree doubtful, let me know.
All right, sir.
The light of the Titanic was settling down to the quietude of the night, and all those tired people had as perfect a sense of security as though they were going to bed in a great hotel. They had implicit faith in the safety of the ship, in the vigilance of the officers, in the caution of Captain Smith, that strong, calm, genial man who now and then had strolled into the staterooms with a cheery word or two.
In a way, a certain amount of wonder never leaves me, especially as I observe from the bridge a vessel plunging up and down in the trough of the sea, fighting her way through and over great waves. A man never outgrows that. April the 14th, 1912, 11:40 p.m.
Crow's Nest, there's ice ahead.
What do you see?
Iceberg right ahead.
Thank you. Iceberg right ahead, sir. Hard to starboard. Full of stand. Hard to starboard. The helm is hard over, sir.
And she said at 10 minutes to 12, she felt a slight bump. And she said it was just like a train pulling into a station. It just jerked. It was very slight, but she said she knew that it was this dreadful something, and she wakened my father. She wakened me. My father said no, he wasn't going up on deck again after the night before. But she literally pulled him out of bed and made him go up. And she then said she was going to dress me, and I, being sleepy and very naughty, said I wasn't going to be dressed. Nothing to be dressed while I came back to bed. My father came back very quickly, because he could get up to the boat deck in the lift very quickly from where our cabin was. And he came back and he picked me up and wrapped his blanket tightly round me, as if I were a baby. And my mother said nothing to him, and I used to say to her sometimes, years afterwards, I can't understand why you didn't say to him, what was it? Which she certainly did not say. And she said, I didn't have to say what was it. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was this dreadful something that I had to live with for months. There was nothing more I could say.
Mr. Murdoch, what was that?
An iceberg, sir. I half starboard, didn't reverse the engines. I was going to hard a port around it, but she was too close. I couldn't do any more.
Close the emergency doors.
They're already closed, sir.
Go down and find the carpenter and tell him to sound the ship.
I'd been in my berth about 10 minutes when I felt a slight jar. But it was not sufficiently large to cause any anxiety to anyone, however nervous they may have been. The engines, however, stopped immediately afterwards. I went up on deck in my dressing gown, and I found only a few people there who'd come up in the same way to inquire why we had stopped. But there was no sort of anxiety in the mind of anyone. We saw from the smoking room window that a game of cards was going on, and I went to ask if they knew anything. They noticed the jar a little more, and looking through the window, they had seen a huge iceberg go close by the side of the boat. They thought we'd just grazed it with a glancing blow, and they'd been to see if any damage had been done. None of us, of course, had any conception that the ship had been pierced below by part of a submerged iceberg. The game of cards was resumed, and without any thought of disaster, I returned to my cabin to read until we started again. I never saw any of the players or the onlookers again.
Up on the bridge, Captain Smith sent for Thomas Andrews, the managing director of Howland and Wolff, who had built the Titanic. Mr. Andrews had been on board to sort out any teething problems on the maiden voyage. He'd been working hard on his plans and notes, changed for dinner, and then returned to his stateroom for more work on his reports. He had hardly noticed the bump, and knew nothing was wrong until the captain called him to the bridge. Things changed quickly. He and Captain Smith made an instant tour of the ship, hastily inspecting the damage below the waterline. She was taking water fast. The iceberg, scraping ruthlessly down the ship from the starboard bow, had cut a 300-foot gash in her side.
It was like this. The Titanic had 16 watertight compartments running from side to side down the length of the ship. She could float with 2, 3, or even 4 of her first 4 compartments gone. But the gash down the side meant that 5 were flooded.
If the lookout fleet had seen the iceberg a few seconds earlier, the Titanic would have swung around. If he had not seen it at all, they would have hit it full on and perhaps have crumpled the bows. This slight glancing blow was far more deadly, slicing open 5 a stroke.
The bulkhead between the 5th and 6th watertight compartments only went as high as E deck, and as the Titanic went down at the head, the water would rise and spill over into the next compartment, and then the next, and the next.
It was inevitable that the Titanic would sink.
So he put his very thick coat on her, and put another on himself, and without words at all, we went out of the cabin, and into the lift and up on the boat deck. Now, if we hadn't done that time, I very much doubt I'd be talking to you today, because, as you know, there was accommodation less than 800 people in the lifeboats, and she was carrying 2,200. So it was a question as who was there in time to get into one of the all too few lifeboats. Well, they weren't launched very quickly, because at first no one thought anything was going to happen. But my father went away and spoke to an officer, and he said, they are going to launch lifeboats, but you'll all be back on board for breakfast. And so they launched these boats, and my father helped. He knew a lot about the sea. And he put me in the lifeboat, and told me to be good, said to me, hold on his hand, and I thought he was coming after me, but he didn't. Then it dawned on me, of course, that he wasn't coming, I didn't see him anymore. And that collision was 10 minutes to 12, and the Titanic sank at 20 past 2. So if we had had enough lifeboats, no one would have died that night at all. And it would have been a 9 days wonder that the ship sank on its maiden voyage. It didn't matter, nobody died, that would have been that. And here we are all these years after, with the whole world still interested in the Titanic.
Below decks in the wireless room, operators Jack Phillips and Harold Bride were manning the Marconi system.
On the night of the accident, I did not even feel a shock. I was standing by Phillips, telling him to go to bed, and the captain put his head in the cabin.
We've struck an iceberg, and I'm having an inspection made to tell what it's done to us. You better get ready to send out a call for assistance, but don't send it until I tell you.
The captain went away, but in 10 minutes, I estimate, he came back. We could hear some confusion outside, but there was not the least thing to indicate that there was any trouble. The wireless is working perfectly.
Send a call for assistance.
What should I send, sir?
The Regulation International Call for help.
Phillips began to send CQD. He flashed away at it. We joked while he did so. All of us made light of the disaster. We joked that way while he flashed signals for about 5 minutes. Then the captain came back.
What are you sending?
CQD, sir.
The humour of the situation appealed to me. I put in with a little remark that made us all laugh, including the captain. Send SOS, I said. It's the new call. It may be your last chance. Phillips, with a laugh, changed the signal to SOS. In the next few minutes, we picked up for a steamship in Frankfurt. We gave her our position and said we'd struck an iceberg and needed assistance. The Frankfurt's operator went away to tell the captain. When he came back, we told him we were sinking by the head. By that time, we could observe a distinct list forward. The Carpathia answered our signal. We told her our position and said we were sinking by the head. The operator went to tell his captain, and 5 minutes later he returned and told us the Carpathia was putting about and heading for us.